A Canadian government minister comes under fire for suggesting a media regulation license. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. To most people, when you hear the idea of government control, I'm sure that makes you a little bit uneasy, and I think rightfully so. Also, when the idea of the state controlling media narratives come up, most people again will become uneasy. This is not the case though for Canada's Heritage Minister. A recent review of Canada's broadcasting laws was conducted and 97 recommendations came out of it. One of the more idiotic proposals though in this basket of goods was giving the government power to regulate media by declaring what's trusted and what's not. Wonderful. It's not as if we haven't seen this time and time again, where the state is able to tell the populace what's right and what's wrong. So, here comes Canada's Heritage Minister, Stephen Guilbeault. He came under massive scrutiny after he appeared to support these notions. He started to pay credence to the ideas by saying things like licensing enforcement for media companies likely won't be applied the same way for small groups as it will for tech giants. It'll be proportional. Well, first of all, what does that even mean? Proportional to what? And why are we even talking about this in the first place? These are terrible ideas. Regulating the media from the government perspective, a government who has an agenda to push upon the people. When I first came across this, I thought it had to be a joke. To me, I thought there was no way a Canadian government minister would actually be paying service to these kind of ideas. It was impossible. He had to be educated enough to know that these are the biggest of slippery slopes in the world. Enacting government control over media sources, people's access to news, never works out good. So let's backtrack a little bit before we move on. The recommendation that we're talking about here essentially lays out that companies delivering audio, audiovisual, or alphanumeric news needs to be regulated if it's content that's going to Canadians, and the body who should do that is the CRTC or maybe another group. They haven't even fully fleshed that part out yet. And I should lay out my bias right now. I am actually someone who this would qualify for. I am sending out audio news, my commentary on things happening in the world. You could consider me to be a media entity, and these rules would drastically change the way I operate. I do have a horse in this race, but even if I didn't, I'm still 100% positive that I would be opposed to this because fundamentally it goes against liberal principles. This here is a shutting down of freedom. It's giving control to the government away from the people. It shuts down freedom of speech and it restricts expression. There's nothing positive about this. And people who are for censorship will try to trick you as if there is. They'll commonly say, oh, it's a way of tackling fake news. Fake news is a major problem, and government regulation and oversight can solve that. I don't think that's any type of solution, though, because it's very likely that the government's going to become the source of fake news themselves one day, as we've seen throughout history. Even today, look at China or North Korea. When the government controls the narrative, that's the only thing that exists now. There is no longer opposition. That's the true force that fights against fake news. To fact check somebody, to call someone out, to debate. There is no doing that when the government is the sole authority on the matter. You actually better enable fake news so that one silver lining isn't even a silver lining. It's tarnished. It's a terrible idea, and there is no benefits from it. I don't want the government telling me what I can and can't talk about. You know why? Because we can't naively believe that they will always act with honor and in our best interest once given these powers. It's like giving them a weapon that you don't want them to use. Why give them the weapon in the first place? We can all acknowledge that fake news is a problem. In a perfect world, or a utopia, where the government was run by angels, maybe it would work if they were trusted to detect falsehoods, but in reality, it's very different. This is the king of slippery slopes right here. The day will come when someone in power wants to curb something in the media, and they're going to do it because it is damaging to their image or their regime. That's the first step. Once they do that, they're going to feel empowered. They're going to continually use this power that was afforded to them by the people, and they will use it to their benefit. You have to understand the way that the government works here. The way politicians remain in power and keep their job is by presenting a positive narrative to you. If you go to the news and see a lot of crazy things happening associated with a particular politician, it's unlikely you vote for them again, and unlikely, therefore, that they get another job. And even further, that they keep the power that they have right now. Some of these positions are very powerful. They can do a lot of things for the country, good or bad. If they really want to keep it, one easy way to do that, if given these powers, is to change the narrative itself, to make the media hype them up, to paint them in a rosy, tainted type of narrative, to make sure that the populace loves them for things that they may or may not have done, to make sure criticism is stifled. To give them access to these kind of powers and to not expect them to be used one day by somebody who has become corrupted is simply foolish. It's almost a certainty. I would actually make the case that the environment of politicians is already getting to that point because we've eradicated some of the more honest ones. We've created an environment where everything is shame. It's a constant battle back and forth of trying to bring the other person down personally. Somebody who's not into that, even though they want the best for the country, would simply walk away. It's just too much toxicity. Look at the recent election, pulling up all this dirt on Trudeau that was highly irrelevant to the position he's running for. It wasn't about his policies, it was attacking him personally. And the same thing happened with Scheer. Somebody who's honest would look at that and say, why would I want to put myself in a position to be ridiculed, to have my family ridiculed? The only people who would run are those who are maybe die-hard supporters of a certain policy and really want to do something, or those who are shameless, those who want power. That's the environment that we've set up. Now, back to this whole censorship topic. Let's say that you do like the current Liberal government and you have no issue with Trudeau having this tool available to him. Ask yourself this: what happens when a politician that you don't like gets into office? Will you still feel the same way? Will you be happy with an ultra-conservative having this power? Or in the reverse, would you be happy with an ultra-liberal having this same power? The answer, if you're thinking, clearly is no. It's just too much of a responsibility given to a body that's not wholly trustworthy. The fundamental problem here is you relieve the public of being the guardians of truth and grant that power entirely to the government. They will tell you what's legit and what's not. The supposed non-legitimate sources will not get licensed and presumably die out. Then, you only have a one-track mind type media. People saying the same thing. We don't know what their criteria even is for getting licensed and whatnot, and the minister talking about it as if it's something that they're actively working on was scary. Now I will say, and I'm going to get to it, that he backtracked his comments after, but first let's stick to this. So, the government can tell you one thing and they can do another. That's a simple fact here. We can't be oblivious to the reality. This idea of regulating the media is simply unconstitutional as it directly violates the freedom of our press and our rights of expression. I don't even know how these guys are talking about it. There's so many things wrong with it, and likely it's illegal. I'm shocked the minister came forward and paid service to these nonsensical notions. It's as if they have no grasp of history. This isn't the first time a country tried to control the media. A government tried to take control of the narrative. It worked out amazing all those other times, right? For the people? The answer is no, it never worked out. It's a terrible thing to do. It's a path to tyranny. You can look at China for a modern day example of state media. People constantly over there are living in open doubt about what's being said to them, or they accept the reality of everything being tainted with an agenda because the government runs the show. Opposition to their narrative is illegal. I've seen reports today actually about China administering fines and jail time to people who write contrary headlines and notions about the coronavirus. What's that even mean? So China supposedly knows all the facts, and if you're out there reporting something contrary, you're being shut down. Maybe that works if you trust China wholly to be the arbiter of truth, but if they're doing something to spin an agenda, and you actually know something contrary to that, you can't even say it. That's where censorship goes. It tips the scales entirely in the favor of government. The individual, the media, the news outlets, they have no power anymore. Now we can all agree that fake news poses threats, but instead of better equipping people who are going to be trained to detect it and fight against it, we want a parent state who makes the calls for us. Forget that. The real answer here is encouraging critical thinking, encouraging people to really analyze what they are ingesting and promote fact-checking. Do your research, understand really what's happening around you, not to have Big Brother getting your back for you. That's lazy, and it's going to lead to indoctrination. If the government tried to mandate what I could and could not say via threat of unlicensing me on this show, I'd probably try to fight that. That's the beginning of the end of freedom in our nation, and it's something that we should not take willingly. What would they do to me even? This is an interesting question too. What happens when you don't comply? Would you get fined? Well, what if you don't pay that? The next step is jail. Really, that's the end game here. That seems to be where this heads. Non-compliance is hit with jail time. And as I said, in a perfect world where we can trust the government to act honestly, truthfully, and with honor, maybe this makes sense, but the reality is that's not going to happen. We sabotage ourselves with a policy like that. This even brings to mind another issue with this notion of fake news. It's hard to pinpoint, and I doubt the government has a mechanism to parse through this. And here's an example of what I mean. So, example 1. If someone says that Canada's capital is Texas, that's clearly fake. If somebody wrote a headline and an article and tried to make an argument about that, you can verifiably, through fact and even science, demonstrating that's incorrect. We can show a map of Canada, show the history books and say, no, Texas isn't even in this country, it's not our capital, and this is verifiably wrong. But here's claim 2. If somebody wrote an article saying that Trudeau is a terrible prime minister who is bringing Canada down, he has to be removed in the next election, is that fake news? We really can't tell right off the bat. It comes down to the arguments here, and that can be argued either way. Now, someone might say, oh, it is fake news because I think it's wrong. Somebody else might say, wait, I think it's right. The core essence here, though, is that it's not verifiably true at surface level. It's not like saying Canada's capital is Texas, and this is where the fake news problem becomes really troubling. In a case where it's hard to detect, that's the real issue here. It's not the people who are saying that Canada is run by Russia, whatever is a CIA operative. Those things are coming off as inherently fake. Something that's more nuanced, though, that may have an argument to be made for it, even though it turns out to be fake or true, that's where the problem is, and that's where the divide has to be tackled. The government can't tell either. They're going to take a biased stance on that because it's not an objectively true or false statement that you're making. It's actually quite the opposite. These kind of statements are entirely subjective, and the real way for you to figure out the truth is to be educated, to better equip yourself to go through the arguments and find out what's true or what's not, to analyze the concepts being laid out for you and for you to come to a conclusion, not for the government to tell you what's wrong or what's right. Gee, I wonder, what would Trudeau say if he was corrupt when he came across a headline like that? Without a shadow of a doubt, he would try to spin it as if it was fake, but we don't know that. This comes down to the individual problem of being equipped and knowledgeable in a democratic society. Now, fast forward a little bit, and this minister here, who was talking about the idea, Stephen Guilbeault, he comes forward and he walks the entire thing back. People basically tore him apart, and I love how the Toronto Star describes this. Guilbeault clutched notes as he went before cameras to say a report submitted last week did not recommend Ottawa to regulate news media. The notes part's funny to me, so you already know that he went back and his boss, Trudeau, probably tore him up himself. He slapped him around and said, what are you doing out here? You're destroying our name. We don't even know if that thing was for sure, and you're talking about it as if it's a part of our plan. The media's coming after us, people are coming after us, and maybe our ratings are tanking. Here are the commands I want you to follow. Here is a note with the exact words you should say, and go to the media right now and say them. And he's clutching these notes like, oh snap, I don't want to anger the boss anymore. So he goes on TV and he says his spiel. You can see how this played out. It's actually quite comical. And it's funny too because they're trying to make the case that, oh, the report never said that. Well, where did you get the idea from then? Did it come out of your bum? It's crazy how they're trying to walk back the narrative entirely as if it never happened. It's painfully clear to me that he's just lying about that. In the previous article, he's talking about the regulatory issue as if he actually was recommended that. He had a lot to say on it. It's not like he didn't know anything and was on these spots speculating. It's simply not true. He knew he was cooked, so he tried to save face, and not only his own face too, but the entire Trudeau government. He damaged the brand with his comments, and the Star also writes that Andrew Scheer attacked Trudeau about this, and Trudeau declared that they will not be imposing the license given all of the pressure. And the Star also writes that right-wing groups and commentators criticized the idea. I don't know about that one. It seemed to me that it got wide criticism from everyone. It wasn't some type of partisan play where only conservatives were upset about it. Liberalism, may I remind them, is founded on freedoms of speech and expression. Those licenses are contrary to that. If you are liberal, you have every reason to be mad about it too. The Star is acting as if anti-censorship is purely a right-wing notion and only conservatives got mad about it. That is false. See, the difference here, though, is that I don't want to cancel the entire newspaper for posting something I believe is wrong. Instead, I'll call it out and lay down the reasons for my thinking. I believe everyone should get credit for standing up to this nonsense, not just those on the right. And I really do think that no rational Canadian wanted good old Trudeau setting up ways to control the media. It's not in anyone's best interest. They then tried to end the article by saying that conservatives called the Liberals Orwellian, a big brother government, and acting like North Korea. Now, I wouldn't consider myself a conservative, but those charges, I'd probably use them too. They seem correct to me. This was an Orwellian attempt at controlling the media. Whenever foolish recommendations are made, though, we typically look at the politician, but they really are just acting on advice. I'm interested in the panel who made the recommendation as well. What are their interests? Why would they say something like this? Who do they work for? Who do they know? How did they even get selected to be on the panel in the first place? To propose ideas to the government about a specific realm of subject matter, presumably you would need experience. They likely aren't putting together a panel of university students to tell them things. That expertise, though, might come with a price, maybe an agenda. People who are connected in the industry, who are friends with corporations or whatnot. If you're telling the government to do something, you likely wouldn't want it to be something that hurts you. The licensing seems like an overall bad idea to anyone with world history context, so I wonder, why are they putting it out there? It's either they knew that and still thought it would be a good suggestion for whatever reason, or they didn't know the consequences of their ideas, and then I'd ask the question of, how can someone so oblivious be advising a Canadian minister? The suggestion is just flat out silly. There's no way around that. Were they trying to meet a quota or something? That's the only rational explanation I can think of. That the government demanded like 90 ideas and had a single one less, and to meet the cap, they put forward this random one here. Who knows? I'm certain of a few things though. Number one, Guilbault, the minister. He is dishonest by saying that no recommendations of media regulation were made. We have multiple sources confirming that, and he's clearly trying to walk it back. Number two, this panel seems oddly misinformed to even be making such a suggestion in the first place now. Extrapolate this across broader government context and you can begin to see why the government really is a game. All of these interest groups here are trying to impart influence, and the politicians are testing the waters from these groups, and they're walking it back after it blows up in their face. You, as a Canadian citizen, have to stay vigilant. See through the haze and figure out what's really going on behind the scenes. So, that now brings us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That will help us grow. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.